That night, Mama had hugged him and kissed him and held him close until he fell asleep. Gerald had felt so warm and special and golden. He wanted to feel like that forever. He knew his Mama loved him. She had bought him a G.I. Joe man last week, and it wasn't even his birthday or Christmas or anything. And most days she combed his hair and dressed him in clean clothes and told him to say, "Yes, ma'am," to grown folks. And sometimes, on really good days, she would hug him and say, "You know you're my best baby boy, don't you, Gerald? You know you're my baby, don't you?" And he would smile, and that warm golden feeling would start at his toes and fill him all the way up to his smile. Even though Mama had yelled at him, today was a good day. Mama always yelled. It was no big deal. Some days he yelled back at her. Then she would slap him, and he'd cry and he'd cuss at her, and then she would slap him until his head hurt. So mostly he ignored her. But today was a good day, a shiny day, he thought. The sun was bright gold outside against a clear blue sky. And inside the grocery store, there were so many colors and sounds and lights that Gerald just grinned. It was always crowded when they went. Other children would be in carts also, and they would have to pass very close to each other. Gerald liked to pretend he was driving a big, fine silver car down the expressway. Sometimes the cart would be a tank, as he passed cautiously through rows of armed cling peaches and silent sentinels that looked like boxes of frosted flakes. And at the checkout lane, the armies rolled smoothly down the long black road that disappeared under the counter. He started to ask Mama where it went, but it was more fun to imagine that it went to a secret hideout, where only sweet potatoes and boxes of oatmeal were allowed. When they got home from the grocery store, Gerald sat on the floor and watched Mama stack the boxes and cans on the shelf. She was whistling. He had never heard her whistle before, and he loved the way she laughed as he tried to imitate her. She changed his clothes, and didn't even yell at him for not being a big boy, and gave him 2 cookies and an apple. Then she went into the other room. When she came out, she had changed her clothes, and Gerald thought he had never seen anything so lovely. She had on her sparkly, fancy dress that Gerald liked to touch. "Mama will be right back, baby," she told him. "I just have to go see Mr. Leroy for a minute. You stay right here and wait for me, you hear?" Gerald started to cry, but he didn't want Mama to lose her good mood, so he just nodded and bit his lip. The door closed, and he could hear her high heels clicking on the steps. Then it was very, very quiet. After he finished both his cookies and the apple had turned brown on the white parts, Gerald looked for something to do. It was getting dark, and he wanted G.I. Joe to sit with him because the shadows on the wall were getting long and scary. He found G.I. Joe on the floor next to Mama's bed, right next to the cigarette lighter that she had been looking for this morning. Gerald picked it up, and for a time he used it as a gun for Joe. Then it was a log for Joe to jump over. Then it was an enemy for Joe to attack. Finally, Gerald started idly flicking the little red handle. At first, it just made a scratchy sound, and the smell made him cough and remember how he'd got that brown place in the palm of his hand. Then he remembered the tiny fire dancer, and he wondered if it still lived in there with the fire-sword soldier. After numerous flicks, he got the fire to stay on. He grinned with delight. The dancer was there, smiling at him and bowing for him, changing from splendid orange to icy green to iridescent purple. The lighter flame flickered magically, making golden the purple shadows on the wall. With sudden inspiration, Gerald shouted, "Hey, Joe, we got a torch!" as he and G.I. Joe marched around the kitchen table. Gerald crawled under the table then, flicking the lighter over and over again to light the way for G.I. Joe. They fought shadows and monsters. They blew up cities and kingdoms. Gerald made the sound effects, and G.I. Joe dutifully followed his general into combat. As the mighty battle came to its climax, Gerald crawled up on a chair and stood on the kitchen